This book is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It is just so good. I just recently reread this book and I just kind of want to talk about it, to be honest. I first read it a few years ago, and ever since then I've half-heartedly been wanting to read it again. I fully decided to reread it before I went to Germany, but then I finally reread it now, so you know. Peace. And I guess I just want to show you, usually when I really like a book and I find it very interesting and there's something I want to get back to later, I dog-ear the pages. And you can see here that I did not do that at all. And this is because I realized when I was reading it for the first time that it was so interesting and it was so great, and I kind of felt like dog-earing every single page that I read. And then I also saw how short the book was, and I realized that if you dog-ear all the pages, you dog-ear none of them. So I just didn't. But that meant that now that I got to reread it, I took notes and I just want to share them with you. So first, for the non-spoiler part of this kind of book talk, book review, whatever it is they want to call it. It's about a Jewish psychiatrist who was taken into the Nazi concentration camps of World War II. He was recounting his experience of being inside a concentration camp and then how his life was like after. It's about his thoughts and observations on suffering, torture, fear, and the meaning of life. So this is someone who has been through pretty much one of the worst things imaginable, and he came out of the Nazi concentration camps having lost all of his family members except for his sister. I don't feel like his wife survived, but he's talking about it as like a retrospective. This is what he observed and what he's come out of it. He's also an existentialist, but not from an atheistic perspective, which is, you know, pretty nice. I give it 5 out of 5 stars. Let's read it. No video I can ever do will do it justice. Now for the spoiler-filled part. So what he does is he splits the psyche and the mental state of the person going through the concentration camps into 3 different stages, 2 during and then 1 after being in the concentration camps. And he also uses actual experiences and moments to try to describe and like bring the meaning closer, is a little literal translation. So in the first stage, he described what it was like to have to give up all of your possessions, to give up everything that you own, I think except your glasses and maybe a belt, and how him and everyone he was with, all the males that he was with, were shaved down. So they were at literally their naked skin, and the experience of all of them huddled together, standing in a room that should not take in that many people, and all of them standing close together. And then he was describing, I mean, first off, can you imagine how weird that would be? Like, you're just standing there completely butt naked, hairless. So that means no hair, no eyebrows, like nothing, and just staring at the people around you. So he was describing that, and he was saying that everyone around him was still able to feel, one, humor, because kind of, you know, a little ridiculous, and also curiosity. And he says that seeing things in a humorous light is some kind of trick learned while mastering the art of living. And in terms of curiosity, he says that it's a fundamental reaction towards strange circumstances. And you know what, that makes sense. But then he was also talking about how they had to go through so much, like they did not think that they could survive in like the dead of winter with such high fevers and without any medication or proper food. But then they did, and then they survived on a lot less sleep than he was taught that humans needed in medical school and what was, you know, available at the time. So the third part of this first stage was surprise that they could actually go through this. And then for the second stage that he was talking about, it was very sad. It was about complete and total apathy to what was going on in the world around him. And he was saying how if he wasn't a psychiatrist, he doesn't think that he would have noticed, and he doesn't think that he would remember, because as a psychiatrist, when the apathy was happening, he was just like, huh, this is interesting. I mean, you know, like he just noted it. Like, I am apathetic at this moment. And the specific instance that he described to go along with this is that he was talking to his friend a few hours earlier, and then later on his friend died, and then he saw the body being dragged away, and he remembers drinking his soup and looking at that and not feeling anything and just continuing to drink his soup. He was saying how that happened to a lot of people, that it was kind of a coping strategy, and that sometimes when he felt this way, or when he was making decisions, like a mathematical decision to do something, he would sometimes remember. And he was also talking about how he's seen with other prisoners, and he tried himself, like there was an instance when he was the only person who could give everyone morale and, you know, give them support in trying to make it again to the next day. He was talking about how even though most people did become apathetic, some people tried their hardest to still show kindness and still try to boost morale, to go around talking to people, to give people their last piece of bread, even when they are in such a dire situation. And he saw that a lot of people took refuge in their own inner lives and in their own thoughts. Some of them escaped to the past, thinking of what happened before. A lot of people escaped to religion. But in that time period, he also noticed that he could tell who was going to survive and who wasn't, based on whether they held on to something he calls like an inner hold, maybe an inner accountability to what's going on in the world around them. And that the second that someone lost this inner hold, it was just such a extreme downfall in their health, in their ability to live life. And because of that, he warned against giving up all ideas of a possible future. He was saying not to just go through this torture trying to forget that this was even real. If you don't think of yourself as possibly having a future, you rob yourself from any possible joy to be able to experience in the moment, and you'll start to see everything as just completely pointless. And then he described it as people thinking or feeling like they were marching towards their graves. And what he suggested when, going through torture is to look at it as if you're looking back onto it from the future. He would imagine telling other people about this experience that he had. He would try to think of giving it as a lecture or whatever it is, so that he could still maintain the fact that this was real, this was happening, but give it that little sense of objectivity. And then interestingly, he mentioned that he found human kindness in both the oppressed group and in the oppressors group. And then he said that just because someone was with him in the concentration camp being, tortured, that did not mean that they were a good person, and they could still be a cruel, terrible example of humanity, which is something I'm still turning over in my mind, because he was saying that you can't really condemn an entire group of people to be evil, thinking about that. We'll get back to that later. And then the third mental stage that he was talking about was the psychology post-liberation, and that he has seen a lot of depersonalization, people completely unable to experience the world as if it was real, everything felt dreamlike. And then he also saw that people felt that they were allowed to do wrong just because wrong has been done onto them, and that right after liberation, they felt the relief of mental pressure, the relief of physical pressure. So a lot of them just ended up eating for an entire day and a half straight, and that they felt that they couldn't stop talking. They just kept talking and talking and talking because they have been in a situation where they couldn't say anything. And then he said that when you listen to these people, which includes himself, listening to them talking, you would feel like they literally can't stop talking, like it was something they had to get out. So that was the first part of the book where he's talking about his own experiences and how they relate to different stuff. And then in the second part of the book, he was talking about logotherapy, which is, I think, something that he helped define or come up with himself, in that it is a therapy that is more focused towards the future and less focused towards the present or self-centeredness. His patients were constantly being refocused and reoriented to the meaning of life. And he specifically gave this story, which I find, kind of amazing, of this American guy who came to him who was talking about how he felt so dissatisfied with his job. He worked with the American government, and he was saying how he felt dejected and it was terrible and he didn't like it. And then every other therapist that he went to told him that this was a problem from his childhood, that he was projecting, that this has something to do with his relationship with his father, and that first he had to fix his relationship with his father, or his father died or something like that. So when he talked to Dr. Frankl said that, bruh, I think you just don't like your job. What do you want in the future? You shouldn't spend your days hating your life. You should be looking forward to it, doing something that you actually enjoy, something that gives your life meaning. And then the guy quit his job, he did something else, he had a great time. And in that instance, he was talking about how concern over the worthiness of life, or the worthwhileness of life, is existential distress and not always mental distress. And so from all of this, he's saying that he doesn't believe that instincts are the only things that drive man. It's not just a conflict between id, ego, and superego. It's about man rising above their instincts, because the instinct in a concentration camp is just to get by. And he also points out that people live and die for values. And he brings it back to normal everyday life, in saying that an existential vacuum is when you feel boredom, where you are completely disinterested in everything around you, you don't care. And then he described this as ultimate meaningless. And then he said that most people, or a lot of people, mask or try to compensate for this vacuum with a will to power or a will to pleasure. So they're either trying to accumulate money or status in the society, or they're turning more towards sex and hedonism. He then goes on to describe how to find meaning. And he asserts that meaning must be found in the outside world, not in your own psyche. You can't just sit there in your room by yourself and not do anything, not interact with the world outside. You know, this was before the time of the internet. Now you could find meaning in your own room by yourself. So the 3 ways that he says that you can find meaning are: 1, to create or do something. What's up, YouTube? Or 2, experience goodness, truth, beauty, nature, and I love this part. Experience another human being in their very uniqueness by loving them. And 3rd of all was your attitude towards suffering, in that you try to find a meaning for that suffering. But only if it's avoidable. Like, he's not into this sadism or like anything else. Like, don't suffer if you don't need to. But he was saying that if you are in a situation where you are suffering because of the political climate or because of like things outside of your control, if you find meaning in it, if you look at it with a good attitude, and I'm not saying this in the whole, you know, think positive, everything will be fine, but I'm saying this from the perspective of someone who's actually been through all of this. He was talking about the attitude that you have towards the suffering that you're taking, and that some people considered this suffering that they were going through, and they made a pact with God, or they were hoping that if they suffered more, their wife or their child or anyone else will not have to suffer as much. Or they tried to grow spiritually from this suffering. They tried to heighten their like mental senses and, you know, like live in their own world a little bit more. And he quotes Nietzsche by saying that he who has a why can bear with almost any how. And he says that in life, we're not looking specifically for happiness, we're looking for reasons to be happy. And he says that success and happiness cannot be pursued, you know, as a goal in themselves, and that they are byproducts of your dedication to a greater cause. At a certain point, he says that life is like a game of chess, where you can't ask the greatest chess masters what is the best move of all time, because the board is always changing, life is always changing. You have to constantly be finding meaning, finding something that excites you, something that you actually care about. In terms of suicide, which he said that most people have thought of when they were in that Nazi concentration camp, when they were through that torture. To him, at least, suicide didn't make sense, because life is also kind of like a movie, and that by ending your life prematurely, you're depriving yourself of the final scene. Only then, at the end of your life, can you accurately tell, or like, you know, estimate whether you've reached your full potential. I mean, I guess it's kind of just a review for myself. I don't know if this is interesting to any of you, but I kind of want to make another video, maybe a part 2, on what I actually think of what he was saying, so how I can relate that to my own life, or like through my own experiences, where I can draw from that. So I've talked a lot already, so I'm just gonna edit this and see what happens. I'll probably do a part 2, because I took notes on what he was saying, but then alongside of that, you know, in a separate, like, off to the side, you know, like less important, I put in my own thoughts and my own ideas of what I thought of these things, because, you know, not been through that, alhamdulillah, Allah like good, but like, I do think that the search for meaning is an ongoing conversation. It is something that, you know, is super important in our own lives. And even Viktor Frankl himself says that, sure, the pursuit of meaning and, you know, the trying to think about your existence and, you know, existential crises, they do give a mental tension, but he was saying this was the only healthy way to live, it was the only good way to live. In that, can you really be happy if you're not wondering why you're here and what you want to do and how you want to spend your life? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Okay, I think I'm done. I'll probably have a part 2. Promises. Nope, this is a prediction. This is a prophecy. It's not a promise. I prophesize that there's going to be a part 2. Okay, I think that's it. Alright, bye. I'm gonna try to link some videos, but if that doesn't work, just stick for a second.